What's up everyone, I'm Sunfish and welcome back to another video on the channel. I haven't done a commentary video in a while. I've been mostly focused on making music and short form content, but I figured I wanted to start a new series where basically I pick an artist who is either very influential in their genre or in a certain scene, or that I just like a lot and has a nice discography, and I basically take a deep dive into their whole discography, listen to all of their albums in chronological order, and give my thoughts on them, compare them, and basically rank them on a tier list. And I thought, who better to pick for the first installment of this series than AVICII, who's been one of my favorite artists of all time for many years now. I think he was a real game changer in the EDM community, and his discography is not that big, although he does have some memorable albums, some memorable tracks. There are 6 albums for us to talk about, 3 that were released while he was alive, and then another 3 that were released posthumously. We're going to go through all of them, give my thoughts on them, and then we're going to rank them at the end. Starting off with his debut album from 2013, we have True. This is, in my opinion, far and away his best work. One of the best EDM albums of all time, one of the best house albums of all time. I'm amazed at how many classic EDM songs and classic pop songs are on this album. Some of them definitely do suffer from oversaturation, especially around the time that they were released. It was very hard to escape some of these tracks like Wake Me Up, but when you give yourself a little bit of space from these tracks and you come back to them, they are just so artful, so well produced, so melodic. This album really showcases Tim's melodic and harmonic and songwriting capabilities to their fullest extent. Now, there isn't really a lot of genre deviation in this album. It is pretty consistently a house album. Within that framework, AVICII comes up with all these different ways to mold the sound. We get some anthemic festival house tracks, we get some disco influence, some jazz and blues. It really helps the album have this unique theme to it and consistent vibe, whereas there's enough variation between all the songs that they don't really start to feel boring. Now, let's get into some of the tracks in particular. Obviously, you have Wake Me Up, probably the most well-known AVICII song ever. This one was played way too much back in the day on the radio, on playlists and everything like that, but I still do think it is a great song. The opening guitar riff is just so iconic, so memorable. Aloe Black's vocals fit the track perfectly, and of course the drop melody is unforgettable. Another thing I want to mention about the album is that all of these songs can basically be instantly recognized by their opening riffs. No matter what instrument it's played on, no matter what it kind of sounds like, you always know from basically the first couple of seconds of the track what you're going to be hearing. The bluesy driving piano riffs on You Make Me add a kind of cooler, darker side to the album. Hey Brother is also a classic track from this album with its anthemic horn section at the drop. We have a little bit of disco and soul influence on tracks like Liar Liar and Long Road to Hell, which actually I believe features an interpolation of the track Take 5 by Dave Brubeck. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they do sound very similar. And we also get a little bit of Daft Punk influence throughout the album, especially the kind of talk box solo on Shame on Me, which I thought was really groovy and really fit the track well. The first leg of this album is definitely more memorable than the second leg, with a lot of the kind of classic EDM tracks that you hear at festivals being on the first side of the album, but that doesn't mean that the second half of the album is bad. It is just as well produced, just doesn't quite feature as many anthemic or singable choruses. One track from the second half of the album I want to highlight is Heart Upon My Sleeve, which goes from an ethereal melodic build-up into this hard-hitting, pumping cello bass drop, which I find really sick. Lay Me Down and Hope There's Someone are a little less memorable, but they're still well-produced, still well-written, and they kind of give the album a little bit of a dip in the energy, which may not be a bad thing considering how high energy and how packed with different sounds a lot of these tracks are. So overall, I think this was a fantastic album. It completely changed the course of mainstream EDM and ushered in kind of a new wave of artists and producers and ways of thinking about electronic music. I love how all of these songs take simple pop or folk song ideas with a guitar or piano riff and a vocal idea, and Tim basically just fleshes them out into these beautiful, danceable EDM tracks with all of these different instruments, different sounds. Probably the best thing about this album, in my opinion, are AVICI's melodies in the drop, the sounds of the drop leads that really kind of define the next generation of EDM and a lot of the music that we would be hearing going forward. I think that this album just really shows Tim's ability to write melodies and ability to kind of capture an emotion within a melody. So I'm going to put this album pretty solidly in the S tier. All right, next, in 2014, there was the remix album to True, which is called True AVICII by AVICII. Basically features remixes that AVICII did of his own songs from True, flipping them into different styles, giving them different tastes, basically reproducing them for live shows. Obviously, this is not new material. It's the same material as on True, but kind of remixed with a different flavor to it. And most of the time, we're not really left with the same energy or intensity that the originals on True had. That being said, it is still nice to listen to some of these remixes, as it's kind of just a fresh take on songs that we already know and love. All of these remixes are titled AVICII by AVICII Remix. That's his way of indicating that he's reworked his own track. The remix for Hey Brother is kind of a cool dark side edit of the original, where instead of going into the brass lead at the drop and playing that drop melody, we have a very dark and intense synth breakdown that feels like it would fit in really well at kind of a dark underground rave. Then with Liar Liar, whereas the original was kind of a darker and groovier track, the remix makes it a little bit lighter and a little bit more melodic. My favorite remix on this album is the remix of Dear Boy, which was already one of my favorite tracks on True. Here, AVICII slows it down and brings us kind of a tropical house kind of vibe with a lot of syncopated pianos and disco sounding beats. This instrumental that he uses for this remix ended up becoming the framework of the beat for his track Sunset Lover, which we're going to get into on the next album. Shame on Me also features a genre switch, and he slows it down again, and we get kind of a hip-hop take on the track, which I think is pretty cool. Overall, this album is nothing too new or too special, but it's just AVICII having fun, messing around with his own tracks, and it does kind of start to show us that he's very interested in exploring new genres, not only being a house DJ and producer. A lot of the genre exploration that we get on this album is going to be further fleshed out in his future works. So, nice remix album overall, nothing crazy, nothing too adventurous. I'm going to put it solidly in the B tier. All right, moving on, we have now Tim's second full-length album of original music, 2015's album Stories. Overall, this album is a lot more adventurous, a lot more ambitious in terms of the genre blending and songwriting. It is no longer a house album. It is more a combination of pop and various styles of EDM and dance pop. That being said, the album still does have a pretty consistent theme, that being kind of beach vibes, sun-kissed vibes, exploring tales told from different points of view. Most of the tracks on here, even though they're very danceable and catchy, do feature some unique storytelling in the songwriting. And of course, AVICII is not making just generic dance pop beats. These are layered and nuanced instrumentals that complement the vocals perfectly. Starting off with Waiting for Love, one of my all-time favorite AVICII tracks and co-produced by Martin Garrix. We see him again referencing back to his original style of dancey, groovy, driving house music with huge electronic buzzy leads. I absolutely love the riff, the piano riff on this track. Moving on from there, we start to get into some genre switches. Talk to Myself is a kind of groovy new disco track with an analog funky bass and some synth string choruses. 10 Days is an introspective and melancholic ballad in 6/8 or 12/8 time, which is slightly less common for a dance album. You hear a lot of stuff in 4/4, so For a Better Day also seems to reference back to True with some driving piano grooves, and it's another house track. True Believer is a very progressive cut, seemingly with some Deadmau5 influence, very hard-hitting, very electronic. Pure Grinding basically slows it down and gives us a kind of trap and hip-hop vibe. Definitely one of the heavier and more aggressive AVICII songs that I've heard. Sunset Lover is another highlight of the album for me. The writing and top-line melody on this track are great. It fits so perfectly with the instrumental. The instrumental, with its hard-hitting piano riffs and disco drums, just really reinforces the whole tropical beach vibe of this album. Overall, while I feel like some of the tracks on here are a little less memorable, a little less anthemic than on True, I believe that it is a more ambitious project, a more diverse project, and the writing, the production is still just as great, the melodicism is still there, and it feels like a really reasonable and sensible progression of Avicii's style from his first album. So I'm going to put this alongside True in the S tier, and those are all of the original Avicii albums that he released when he was alive. Now getting into the first of Avicii's posthumous albums, we have 2019's album Tim. This album was basically already well into production when Avicii passed away. His team said that about 80 or 90% of the tracks were finished. However, it is still difficult to compare this album that accurately to the previous two because it wasn't 100% his execution of all of the ideas on here. That being said, I do think that it was executed really tastefully, really well, and I think it's probably the closest we could have gotten to what Tim had in mind when he was working on these songs. The album basically finishes the arc that we've been hearing across his previous two albums, going from wild, anthemic EDM dance tracks to a little bit more low-key pop production. We still retain a lot of the beachy and summer vibes that we were hearing on Stories. Once again, the songwriting and melodicism absolutely shines on this album. We have a hint of his classic wild EDM festival sound on Heaven. However, it is adapted into his new style by having most of the song be a kind of acoustic rock dancey song with a piano riff, guitar riffs, and then featuring only one drop at the end where it does get wild, it does get loud. It's still not quite as festival-y or as electronic as the stuff we were hearing on True. A lot of the leads and instruments on this album are less synthy than before and more sample-based or more acoustic. There seems to be an emphasis on live performance. For example, the lead melody on SOS is this kind of plucky marimba thing that was played in with a keyboard and uses a sampler. The string leads on Tough Love are beautiful, just circling around each other, perfectly complex in a way that makes you kind of want to dance, makes you feel something different, but doesn't really confuse you, doesn't distract you from the groove. The chorus writing really shines on this album, especially on Excuse Me Mr. Sir and SOS, as well as Heaven and Ain't a Thing. All of these tracks really just feature memorable, concise choruses that you can easily remember, easily sing to, and it really shows that Avicii hasn't lost his songwriting chops at all. Still knows how to make a song hit. And not to say that these songs sound insincere either. You can definitely get the sense that this is truly the sonic vibe and the lyrical vibe that he's feeling and that he wants to put out. That actually enhances the vibes of the tracks. The one track I didn't really like on this album was the Heart Upon My Sleeve remix with Imagine Dragons. Even though I like some stuff by Imagine Dragons, I feel like their addition to this track was really unnecessary, and the kind of shouts over the drop just bring it down a little bit and feel a little cringe. But overall, this was a great album. I'm really happy that these songs were resurfaced. It feels like a logical continuation of what Tim was doing when he died, and I still find myself going back to these songs, listening to quite a few of them regularly. To me, it just kind of shows perfectly what we should all be striving to do as musicians in terms of progressing our sound, looking for new things, new influences, new ways to make music. I'm going to put this one up in the A tier. The next album we got was a live album from 2016, live from Osaka, Japan. This is a 2-hour-long headline set that Avicii played in Japan and features some really cool IDs and some cool reworks of his tracks, some cool mashups that are exclusive to his live sets, notably the Spectrum and Say My Name mashup, the Wake Me Up and Live for the Night mashup, and even his inclusion of the Skrillex remix of Levels really added some energy and some vibe to the track list. Some of the transitions are a little abrupt, but most of them are pretty smooth, and he only really breaks the tempo when there's a need to, meaning when you're entering a new section of the set or when he's about to present one of the main songs in the track list. A lot of the set features Tim seamlessly transitioning from classic melodic house into gritty, electronic, complextro, and other genres. But we do mostly stay consistently around the 125 to 130 BPM mark. Really, it's just a great set to throw on, get lost in, hear a blend of basically all of the best Avicii tracks. There aren't many hints of the work from the album Tim, In the set, I think he played Heaven once, which was cool to hear the alternate version, or the shape that the track was in at that time. Really, this set is just kind of mixing together the best moments from True and from Stories, the best remixes, just kind of finding different ways to play with them. We also get quite a few of the AVICII by AVICII remixes. We also hear a lot of the singles that AVICII was known for that didn't really make it onto any of his albums, such as, like I said, Levels, also The Days and The Nights. So yeah, really great live set, really strong mixing, great track selection, just kind of playing the hits and even playing some lesser known tracks of his. Good album to just throw on, get lost in, dance for 2 hours. It's a great time. So I'm going to stick this up there in the A tier. And finally, the last AVICII album that was released after he passed is AVICII Forever, which is a compilation album that was released by his record label, which basically takes all of his most notable tracks and packages them on a new album. The only new material that is featured on this album is the track Let's Ride Away with L. King, which is an unreleased demo from, I believe, the Stories era. And I like this track a lot. I'm glad it was released. It's more chill, tropical house, anthemic and heroic brass line and some sweet vocals. Other than that, though, I'm not really seeing any purpose for this album being there. It's just a repackaging of all of his tracks, and you know, it does feature some of the tracks that aren't on the other albums, such as The Days or Silhouettes. And even though there is a small chance that that will kind of let some new fans find out about these tracks, I just kind of feel like this album was a bit of a cash grab and a bit unnecessary. The music that Tim has released stands so well on its own and the way that he released it, and I'm just not really seeing any purpose for this album being there. I think we should just honor his legacy, and I'm glad that Let's Ride Away was released, but other than that, I'm not really vibing with this album. Not because any of the content on it is bad, but just because of the context, and I don't really think it was necessary. So I'm gonna put this one in the D tier. Don't worry though, we're not going to end this video on a low note, because we're also going to talk about the AVICII 01 EP released in 2017, when he first started to experiment with going full pop mode, full kind of dance pop. And this EP basically laid the groundwork for the album that would eventually become Tim. Even though this isn't technically an album, it's an EP with only about 20 minutes of runtime, it still has some of his most famous songs and was the last kind of substantial body of work that he released. So I figured I would just mention it. And I do like this project quite a bit, even though it's a lot less hard-hitting than the stuff on True and even Stories. You still have consistently good songwriting and melodicism. The production is honestly quite a bit more nuanced than it was back on True. You have a lot of different layers of instrumentation, a lot of different kinds of sounds. The arranging and part writing is really good. All of the instruments fit together. Really, it seems like AVICII kind of leaning more into what it really means to be a producer. You know, how to make a great instrumental that will complement a song and an artist. A lot of the beats on this project are slower and feature more syncopation, so we're not really getting that many house cuts. It's more kind of pop and disco and hip-hoppy. The one track that I will say feels like a callback to the early AVICII days is You Be Love, which features kind of a wild EDM drop with a buzzy synth. Overall, the drops on this album, although they are there and they are noticeable, they're a lot shorter and a lot more subdued than on his other album, giving the sense that this isn't so much an EDM project as a pop project. But that being said, there are danceable moments, there are drops, they are just tamer and really orchestrated carefully to fit in with the vibe of the song, which I think is really good. The EP basically retains Tim's sense of melodicism and good writing, but puts it under a new lens of production with new textures and new styles. Lonely Together features a memorable anthemic chorus by Rita Ora, with bouncy, groovy marimba pluck things in the drop. The song Without You is probably my personal favorite, with a hard-hitting drop, some cool syncopated synth chords, and the lyrics kind of just hit a lot harder now in the present day after what's happened. And finally, the remix of So Much Better by Sandro Cavazza features some beautiful ethereal plucks in the beginning with a chill groove. Really just kind of makes you feel lost on the beach in the ocean. Overall, this is a great project and should not be overlooked, even though it's not a full album. I'm gonna put it in the A tier. So there you have it. That is all of the albums released by Avicii. This was a fun video to do. I really enjoyed going back through his discography, listening to all of his stuff. Really made me learn a lot as a producer, as a DJ, and just as a listener and as a fan. But let me know what you guys think of these rankings. Let me know what other artists I should look at next. Thank you guys so much. Love you guys. I'll see you next time.